At 3:17 in the morning, a 22-year-old sailor named Marcus Webb was standing watch on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The Persian Gulf air was thick and humid. He had his phone out and was typing a message to his wife back in Norfolk, Virginia. She had just sent him a photo, their daughter 3 weeks old, wrapped in a yellow blanket. He had never held her, never smelled the top of her head. He typed back, "She's perfect. Tell her daddy's coming home." He hit send. The message showed delivered. It would never show read. What happened in the next 11 minutes will be studied in every naval war college on the planet for the next 100 years. The USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 90 aircraft, a crew of nearly 6,000 souls, was struck, catastrophically damaged, and lost in the Persian Gulf, following a coordinated Iranian ballistic missile assault that shattered every assumption the American military establishment held about what its adversaries could actually do. This is not a skirmish. This is not a miscalculation. This is the most catastrophic single loss of American naval power since the Second World War. And it was delivered not by a superpower with a century of maritime doctrine, but by a nation Washington spent decades dismissing as a manageable regional irritant. Tonight we go through exactly what happened, how it happened, what it means, and what nobody in Washington is willing to say out loud. Let me tell you something about the Aegis combat system. It is, without exaggeration, the most advanced naval air defense architecture ever built. Radar arrays tracking 200 targets simultaneously. Fire control systems processing engagement solutions faster than any human brain. Interceptor missiles designed to kill ballistic warheads in the terminal phase, the last 30 seconds before impact, when the margin for error disappears entirely. The United States Navy spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building this system. Iran didn't try to defeat it. They did something far more dangerous. They did the math. Every Aegis-equipped ship carries a finite number of interceptor missiles. There is a hard, physical, magazine-limited ceiling on how many threats any strike group can engage before it runs out of something to shoot back with. Iran knew that number. They built a launch inventory that exceeded it, not through technical superiority, but through arithmetic. The attack came in 3 precisely sequenced waves. The first wave was never meant to sink anything. Hundreds of low-altitude ballistic missiles on compressed trajectories, designed specifically to force the Aegis systems into maximum engagement rate immediately. The destroyers and cruisers surrounding the Abraham Lincoln began firing interceptors at a sustained rate their systems were never built to maintain. Magazines built for days of moderate threat were consumed in minutes. That was the point. The second wave arrived before the first was finished. High-speed cruise missiles, not aimed at the carrier, aimed at the radar arrays and communication systems of the escort ships. Within 4 minutes, the coordinated defensive picture that makes a strike group function as a unified system began to fracture. Jamming across multiple frequency bands completed the isolation. Each ship was now fighting alone, blind, and nearly empty. The third wave arrived into a defense that was already dying. Precision ballistic missiles, heavy warheads, terminal guidance refined through 2 decades of quiet investment in technology that Washington spent years dismissing as beyond Iran's reach. The Abraham Lincoln's close-in weapon systems fired until they couldn't. 17 minutes. From first radar contact to the moment the carrier lost all capacity to defend itself. Less time than it takes to watch a pre-flight safety briefing. Less time than Marcus Webb's daughter had been alive when her father sent his last message. Iran did not defeat the most advanced naval defense system on Earth through genius. They defeated it through patience, 2 decades of disciplined, strategically coherent investment in a single capability, the ability to make the Persian Gulf too expensive for an American carrier to enter. Tonight they proved it works. There is a room underneath the east wing of the White House with no windows, walls lined with screens, air that smells like recycled oxygen and burnt coffee. At 4:11 in the morning, every senior national security official in the United States government was sitting around its conference table. Not one of them was speaking. There was a word hanging in the air above that table, a word everyone understood, a word every piece of incoming data was confirming, with brutal clarity, and not one of them was willing to be the first to say it out loud. Sunk. Because the moment someone says it, everything that follows becomes historical, congressional testimony. The first line of the obituary for an era of American power stretching back 80 years. So they sat. They spoke in careful language about the status of the engagement and the current operational picture, and confirmed loss of contact with CSG-12. 3 hours and 40 minutes of careful language. While 6,000 families in Virginia and California and Hawaii were waking up and reaching for phones that weren't ringing. Here is what the Pentagon was not saying publicly in those 14 hours of silence. They had warnings, not vague atmospheric noise, specific warning, sourced from human intelligence inside Iran's Revolutionary Guard command structure, from signals intercepts, from the kind of pattern analysis that professional intelligence officers spend careers learning to read. The Abraham Lincoln had been in the Persian Gulf for 11 days. 11 days for every targeting system Iran built to generate a firing solution of sufficient precision to do exactly what it did. The question, the one that Senate committees will eventually subpoena classified records to answer, is not whether the intelligence existed. It is who read it, who briefed it, who nodded and said understood, and then made the decision to leave the carrier where it was. Outside the gates of Naval Station Norfolk, they were gathering. Wives, husbands, parents, children old enough to understand what a notification officer at the front door means. They weren't watching the news. The news wasn't saying anything yet. They were watching the gates, because when something real happens, the base changes before the television does. Guards get quieter, traffic patterns shift, certain vehicles begin moving with a deliberate purpose that military families learn to recognize. A woman named Diane Webb, 23 years old, holding a 3-week-old girl in a yellow blanket, was standing in that parking lot. She had driven herself. She hadn't called her mother yet, because calling her mother would make it real in a way that standing in a dark parking lot somehow still wasn't. She was watching the gate. She already knew. She was just waiting for someone official enough to confirm it. That is the cost of 14 hours of silence, not measured in strategic credibility or deterrence calculus, measured in a parking lot in Norfolk at 5 in the morning, measured in a folded flag on a kitchen table and a cup of coffee that nobody can drink. When a single event changes the world, it rarely announces itself as such. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was reported on page 12 of most American newspapers. History's true turning points almost never look like turning points when they are happening. This one does. Every foreign minister, every defense chief, every head of state recognized within hours what the satellite imagery was confirming. The carrier is gone. And with it, not American power itself, but the specific 80-year-old assumption that American power projection is essentially cost-free for the nation projecting it. That assumption is what every American security guarantee in every corner of the world ultimately rests upon. In Taipei, the calculus is immediate and severe. Taiwan's entire defense posture rests on one foundational assumption: that in a crisis, American carrier forces will arrive in time to matter. If a carrier strike group cannot survive a sustained ballistic missile assault in the Persian Gulf against Iran's inventory, what does the math look like against China's DF-21D and DF-26 in the Taiwan Strait? China has deployed carrier-killing missiles in numbers that dwarf Iran's. The geometry is different, the distances are different, but the arithmetic is identical, and Taipei knows it. In Beijing, a group of PLA strategic planners has been awake since before the first Iranian missile left its launcher. They were watching not because China had any operational role in what Iran did, but because they have spent 2 decades developing their own carrier-killing doctrine. And tonight they received something no war game could provide: live data, real engagement metrics, the precise moment Aegis tracking capacity reached saturation, the frequency bands most vulnerable to jamming, terminal guidance performance under actual electromagnetic conditions. Every data point directly applicable to Chinese operational planning in the Western Pacific. Iran ran a full-scale live-fire validation of the concept. Beijing's entire maritime strategy is built around and delivered the results free of charge, with no Chinese fingerprints near the engagement. In Moscow, no statement is necessary. The technical foundations of what Iran accomplished, the radar architecture, the electronic warfare integration, the guidance refinements, did not emerge from Iranian engineering in isolation. Russian technical cooperation has been present throughout the maturation of Iran's strategic missile program. Tonight, those fingerprints are attached to the most significant validation of asymmetric anti-access doctrine in the history of modern warfare. In a period when Western capitals argue that Russian military technology is overrated, the message Iran's success delivers is pointed. Western conventional military superiority is not a fixed fact of nature. It can be studied, mapped, and defeated by nations willing to invest in the right capabilities over sufficient time. Moscow will not hold a press conference to say this. The Persian Gulf said it for them. In Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, this is the longest night in a generation. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar have built their entire security architecture on one ultimate guarantor, the American Carrier Strike Group. The visible, deployable demonstration of commitment that could arrive within days and make any Iranian military calculation instantly unfavorable. That guarantor just sank. The conversations happening in these capitals are not about abandoning the American relationship. They are about something that hasn't been seriously entertained in decades. Hedging. What does it look like to quietly, plausibly begin exploring alternative arrangements, not as replacement, but as insurance? What does it look like to take a phone call from Tehran that 6 months ago would have been declined without discussion? These governments are too sophisticated for panic-driven realignment, but hedging, once it begins, has its own momentum. At 6:47 in the morning, a trader named Kevin Park walked onto the floor of the New York Mercantile Exchange and looked at his screen. 19 years in the business. He had traded through 2008, through COVID, through every geopolitical shock the modern era had delivered to global energy markets. He looked at his screen and sat down slowly, the way a man sits down when his legs stop working before his brain has processed what his eyes are telling him. He called his wife, told her to fill both cars with gas before she took the kids to school. She asked why. He said, just do it, and buy whatever's in the grocery store that keeps. 21 million barrels per day pass through the Strait of Hormuz, 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply, 1/3 of all globally traded liquefied natural gas, moving through a waterway at its narrowest point, just 21 miles wide, a waterway that Iran has now demonstrated it can make extraordinarily dangerous for any vessel it chooses to target, including the most advanced naval vessels on Earth. The question the energy market is asking is not whether Iran will physically close the strait. Closing it entirely would be war against every nation simultaneously, including China, Iran's most significant economic partner. Iran is too sophisticated for that. The question is more precise. What is the insurance premium on a supertanker transiting a waterway where the naval force supposed to guarantee its safety just sank? That premium, the fear premium, the uncertainty premium, the we don't know what the rules are anymore premium, is not a future concern. It is being calculated right now in Lloyd's of London, in every major shipping company, in every treasury ministry whose growth projections depend on imported energy arriving on schedule. Oil futures climb, not spike, climb. The distinction matters. A spike implies panic and correction. A climb means the market has done the math and decided the new price reflects the new reality. Supertanker rates for Persian Gulf loadings double, then double again. Several vessels already in transit request military escort. There is no force immediately available at the scale being requested. Ships slow down, some stop, some turn around, and underneath the headline numbers, something quieter and more consequential is happening. 3 nations, their identities not yet public, reach out to Chinese counterparts to accelerate discussions about settling energy contracts in renminbi rather than dollars. Not from ideological commitment to Chinese hegemony. From rational hedging. The petrodollar system was never created by law or treaty. It was created by American diplomatic ingenuity and the implicit guarantee of American naval power in the Persian Gulf. Remove the guarantee, even partially, even in the form of reasonable doubt, and the architecture holding it in place begins, quietly at the margins to shift. The macro numbers always obscure the human translation. In Jakarta, 11 million people. In Nairobi, in Manila, in Dhaka, cities where energy import costs consume a disproportionate share of household income. The price moving on a screen in New York this morning is not an abstraction in these places. It is the cost of cooking fuel, the cost of a generator through a power outage, the cost of kerosene for the lamp a child does homework under. Geopolitical shocks never distribute their consequences evenly. The nations least responsible for the decisions that produce the crisis absorb the largest share of its weight. There is a silence that descends on powerful institutions when the truth they have been managing becomes too large to manage. Not the silence of ignorance or confusion. The silence of people who know exactly what happened, exactly why it happened, and have collectively, without a single meeting or memo, decided that the most dangerous thing they could do is say any of it out loud. Washington is in that silence tonight. And silence, in moments like this, is itself a form of answer. So let us ask the questions the silence is suppressing. Did they know? Not whether American intelligence knew Iran had ballistic missiles. Everyone knew that, documented in open congressional testimony for 2 decades. The specific question, in the 72 hours before the engagement, what did the intelligence picture actually show? The pre-launch signatures, communications pattern changes, logistics movements, targeting system activations that professional analysts are trained to recognize. That record exists in classified files. It will eventually be subpoenaed, and the answer will not be a clean yes or no. It will be something more disturbing. They knew enough, and someone decided enough wasn't enough to change the plan. Who decided? Decisions of this magnitude flow through a documented chain of command, constructed precisely so accountability can be assigned when things go wrong. But decisions of this nature are never made by a single person in a single room. They emerge through layered consensus in which every participant has sufficient deniability and insufficient sole ownership that accountability produces not a name but a system. And systems, unlike individuals, cannot be court-martialed. Someone authorized the deployment, someone reviewed the threat assessment and made a judgment about acceptable risk. That judgment was wrong. The distance between wrong and criminal negligence is a question the United States Congress and the families of 6,000 sailors will spend years trying to answer. Was the carrier already obsolete? This is the question the defense establishment finds most threatening, because it implicates not individuals, but the institution itself. The aircraft carrier is not simply a weapon system. It is the physical embodiment of a theory of power, that the ability to project overwhelming force anywhere on Earth, rapidly and visibly, is the foundation of deterrence. For 80 years, that theory worked. But a quiet body of analysis inside the defense community has been asking, in classified settings with classified conclusions, whether the carrier can survive the high-end threat environment that adversaries have spent 20 years specifically designing to defeat it. The Persian Gulf just made that classified conclusion public. And the question that follows is this: if the vulnerability was understood and the engagement data suggests it must have been, what does it mean that the deployments continued? That the deterrence narrative continued to be sold to allies and the American public in terms that did not reflect the classified reality? It means the institution either did not believe its own threat assessments, or it did believe them and continued anyway. Neither answer is acceptable. Both are terrifying. The fires on the Abraham Lincoln are out, not because anyone put them out, because there is nothing left to burn. The search and rescue operations are winding down in the way they always wind. Down when the math of time and open water has rendered the word rescue into something everyone understands, has become something else. The Persian Gulf is still, somewhere in that stillness, at coordinates that will be classified for decades. The USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 is completing its descent into the silt of the Persian Gulf floor. 90 aircraft, 6,000 souls, the full symbolic weight of 80 years of American global dominance, settling, quietly, into the dark. History has broken 3 foundational American assumptions in the modern era. Vietnam broke the assumption that American conventional military superiority could overcome determined asymmetric resistance on an adversary's home terrain. September 11th broke the assumption that geographic distance provided immunity from non-state actors willing to weaponize civilian infrastructure. Tonight broke something different, something the previous 2 moments left intact. The assumption that the carrier strike group could project force into any body of water on Earth and survive. That assumption is not wounded tonight. It is not complicated or in need of reassessment. It is at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. At 7:23 in the morning Eastern Time, Diane Webb is sitting in the kitchen of her apartment on Granby Street in Norfolk. She came home from the parking lot an hour ago. Her mother is here making coffee neither of them will drink. Her daughter is asleep in the yellow blanket, breathing the slow, deep breath of a 3-week-old who has not yet learned that the world contains the specific weight of this particular morning. There is a folded flag on the kitchen table. An officer came. He said the words officers are trained to say in the sequence they are trained to say them. He was 26 years old and his hands were shaking. Diane noticed his hands were shaking and thought, he's younger than Marcus was. She thanked him. She doesn't know why she thanked him. She is thinking about what she will tell her daughter. Not today, not this year, but someday when her daughter is old enough to ask the question. Children always eventually ask. The one that starts with why and ends with a silence that no answer fully fills. Why was he there? Did they know what could happen? Did anyone in any of those rooms, behind any of those closed doors, did anyone stop before they signed whatever they signed and deployed whatever they deployed, and think about this kitchen table, this folded flag, this cup of coffee that nobody can drink? What Iran accomplished tonight did not happen by accident. It happened because a nation looked at the strategic environment surrounding it, the sanctions, the isolation, the military pressure, the regime change rhetoric, and made a decision about what kind of power it needed to survive, not the kind of power that mirrors American power. A different kind, asymmetric power. The power that comes from studying your adversary's strengths with enough patience to find where those strengths become vulnerabilities, and then investing over 2 decades in the exact capabilities designed to exploit exactly those points. It was a plan, executed with patience, precision, and strategic coherence, that the Washington Consensus, the consensus that spent 30 years describing Iran as a manageable second-tier power that sanctions would eventually bring to heel, did not believe Iran was capable of. The plan worked, and the lesson it teaches is not comfortable for any power that relies on the assumption that its adversaries are less capable and less strategically sophisticated than they actually are. Assumptions are not intelligence. Assumptions are what you fall back on when you stop doing intelligence seriously enough to challenge them. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, at this moment, another American carrier strike group is underway. The sailors on that ship woke up this morning and read the same reports the rest of the world is reading. They had the quiet conversations, the kind that happen in pairs, in corners, away from the group. The kind where people say what they are actually thinking. They are thinking about the Abraham Lincoln, about the threat envelopes on their charts, and the interceptor counts in their magazines, about whether the people who make the decisions that send them to the places they are sent have done the math correctly. Whether someone in the chain above them is asking the right questions and getting answers that are actually true rather than institutionally convenient. They are doing their jobs because that is what they do, but they are thinking. The strategic fires lit by this engagement will burn for decades. In every naval war college, in every defense ministry, in every alliance headquarters where the credibility of American security guarantees forms the foundation of collective security. The questions being asked tonight have no comfortable answers, and the silence with which Washington is answering them is not neutral. It is a choice, and choices in moments of this magnitude have consequences that outlast the people who make them. What do we owe the people we send? Not as a policy question, as a human question. What do we owe Marcus Webb? What do we owe Diane, sitting in that kitchen, with that flag, with that coffee, with that daughter who will grow up and ask a question that someone is going to have to answer? The answer is not a like or a subscribe. The answer is attention. Sustained, informed, undeceived attention to the decisions being made in your name, with your money, with the lives of people who trusted their institution enough to take an oath to it. Pay attention. Ask the questions the silence is trying to suppress. And remember always the message on a phone at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, showing delivered. Forever. The Persian Gulf is still. The world is not. And history, as it always does, is already moving toward whatever comes next.